and mobilizing our ships to go out there and protect endangered species essentially right now, today, tomorrow, next week, next month, next year. I should also share right off the top that we're entirely donation driven. We get no money from any government anywhere. And 315,000 individuals have donated to our cause since it began. And in a typical year, we get donations from around 15,000 to 16,000 individuals, and that's what keeps the fuel in the tanks of our ships. That's what allows us to pay our crews and mount these campaigns. So I think someone's going to try to put up some slides, and if that works fine, then that's fine. I can't see the screen, so I'll just have to, maybe someone could let me know when the slides are up there, and then I can follow somewhat on my phone. And if the slides don't work out, I can just continue a little bit and talk about each one of our campaigns as well.
The slides are started now.
Okay, I have Desert Dolphins has started sharing their screen. Wonderful. So this is largely just covering what I was just chatting about. This is the banner campaign that Maria was kind enough to reference, and we'll talk about it in some detail. But this is largely, that's a Mexican Navy ship that has most likely been brought out to this situation because of our drones flying over this fishing craft that you can see to your right. And when I talked about technology getting so much better in just the last year or two, we can now actually fly our drones over this fishing boat, and we can actually zoom down on those nets that you can see, and we can analyze the dimension of the mesh on the nets, and based on the dimension of the mesh, we can tell what they're out there to fish and whether or not they're out there fishing illegally. Many of you, an audience like this, knows very well what illegal fishing, or what's called illegal, unreported, and unregulated fishing is doing. Globally, it's a business larger than the global drug trade, for example. And so what we do in this situation is we use technology as well as just our direct personal intervention to, and this is in the Vaquita Refuge in the Upper Gulf of California, to analyze exactly what these folks are out there doing. For example, if they're fishing shrimp, that would be legal, and we would largely leave them alone. But if they're dropping nets that are designed to catch the totoaba, which is not endangered, but IUCN regards it as at risk, then we would work with the Navy to actually intervene and either escort these people out of the protected area or seize the nets, or both. And I'll talk about that in a little bit more detail as we go along, but we could go to the next slide, please, if we can. And we can skip over that because I mean, we have a wonderful board, but I'd rather talk about our ships and our captains and our crews, so we can just kind of keep going. So what we've seen in the last 2 years, the Upper Gulf of California was choked with illegal fishing. And just so everyone understands what has brought the vaquita to the edge of this extinction, is that the totoaba are largely the exact same size as the vaquita porpoise, and the totoaba are caught so that their swim bladder can be dried and petrified and then sold, brought over to the black markets of Asia and sold as an aphrodisiac. So those exact same nets, getting back to that mesh size that I was talking about, the very nets that are used to catch the totoaba over the last couple decades also catch the vaquita. And so it's that's the industry, that's the illegal trade that has brought the vaquita to the edge of extinction. And so what we've done is institute a variety of protocols throughout the Vaquita Refuge, and more specifically what's called the zero tolerance area, which is a UNESCO recognized protected area. And we monitor that with radar, sonar, drones, and also the direct intervention of our ships and work with the Mexican Navy. And what we've seen in the last 2 years is a maturity and a scaling of our impact. So Sea Shepherd used to respond to one bad ship doing one bad thing. And we've gotten to the point now with our technology and perfecting some of these strategic models of these campaigns that we can actually start to actually focus on prevention, preventing hundreds of ships from doing hundreds of bad things. And that's really wonderful to see in an organizational context when you can go from reaction to prevention. And our data, our science reports, and what our ships do in the upper Gulf are uploaded a couple times a week and made available for government officials and NGOs and journalists the world over to see exactly what we're seeing, what kind of crafts we're seeing, what kind of illegal fishing we're seeing, what kind of legal fishing we're seeing, et cetera. And over the last 2 years, with using 2022 as a baseline, we've maintained a 90% reduction in the illegal fishing in that protected area, which we're really, really encouraged by. And then on top of that, and I'll talk about this a little bit once we maybe pull the slides out, is we also have pulled over 1,200 ghost nets from the upper Gulf. And just last year in 2023, we pulled over 10 miles of ghost nets out of the upper Gulf. Some of you may know that we have now instituted a protocol of every year doing what's called the Vaquita survey. It used to be done every 2 or 3 or 4 years. And now, because the situation is so dire and we're up against decades of devastation to that species, we're now instituting this on an annual basis. And traditionally, we've done it the last few years. In May, we gather 24 scientists from all over the world and work with CONAMP, which is essentially Mexico's EPA, if you will, and the Mexican Navy. And some of the scientists are from other foundations, think tanks, NGOs, et cetera. And we do and it's led by Dr. Barbara Taylor, who's probably the greatest living expert on the vaquita in the world right now. And we do an in-depth analysis of the population, and then that data really allows us to continue to perfect the campaign. We see changes in some of their migratory patterns and how they move around based on the seasons, and all of these things allow us to really dial in our efforts on behalf of trying to protect the vaquita. And we can go to the next slide, but we get support from at least shout outs from people like Leonardo DiCaprio and things like that, which quite literally almost broke our server when he did that tweet, which is a good problem to have. So when I talk about prevention and trying to get kind of ahead of the curve on some of these things, that also requires a lot of diplomacy. And to give you one example of how we are also moving the ball forward, that Sea Shepherd is moving the ball forward. You can stay right here. Thank you. Is in January of this year, I was part of a delegation that went down, and based on the vaquita survey results of 2023, we had a significant amount of sightings of the vaquita that, forgive my color blindness, but that center rectangle that's kind of on a decline going to the bottom right. I think that's dark brown, but with my eyes, one never knows. Is the actual zero tolerance area where the international law says that absolutely nothing can really happen there at all. And that's what we've largely been protecting and patrolling for the last couple of years. We made the case based on the 2023 vaquita survey that we were seeing 30% of our sightings in 2023 were to the northwest and to the southwest. And so we went back and made the case that we have to continue to evolve, we have to continue to improve. And so that striped area is what we expanded into this year. So constantly evolving, using new technology, different ships, but also working on the diplomatic front to keep pace with the challenge, because these are species and there's migratory elements, there's calving elements, there's a whole bunch of things that result in various species moving around. And then the second thing, this was an agreement in January of 2024, was that we would also take on responsibility for protecting the Totawaba across the entire Vaquita Refuge, which is a gigantic responsibility and one that we're very excited about, because that allows us to get further up that food chain, if you'll allow me the term, of the issue, of the challenge, of the problem, and get further up, and further along in the pursuit of prevention. So these are all wonderful. So it's ships, it's science, it's sonar, it's radar, it's drones, but it's also doing the diplomatic work to try to align our diplomatic efforts with what we're seeing on the water, and trying to keep pace with these challenges as they evolve. We can go to the next slide. And for example, now, and this, I'll just talk about this briefly, but now that we have responsibility for the entire Vaquita Refuge, our current flagship is the Seahorse, which is actually, we purchased from the petroleum industry, and it's an offshore support vessel. It's literally designed, has 1 million pounds of ballast, and it's designed to go out and sit off these oil rigs, and sit there for weeks or months. And so that's our flagship in the Upper Gulf. But based on these new responsibilities and having responsibility for the entire refuge, we have a need for speed, it's my pithy phrase for these things. And so we're augmenting the campaign with these Seahawks that can take a Sea Shepherd and a Navy team to any corner of the Vaquita Refuge in seconds. And we can move on now. Two of our campaigns that touch on whales, thank you, happen, one in the Revillagigedo archipelago, where we largely focus on humpback whales and their breeding. As many of you know, they with climate change and things like that, they have to swim further and further away to give birth, and then come back with their calves. And so we're looking at how the change in the environment is impacting their migratory patterns and their calving rates and things like that. And then off Guadalupe Island, we're focused on a species of whale that actually we discovered about 4 years ago in this Guadalupe campaign, and looking at Cuvier's beaked whales. And both of these campaigns use virtually pristine environments to produce a lot of data that allows us to look at these species of whales almost as if mankind didn't exist. So when we think about things like noise pollution and sonar and some of those other things, this produces data that we can use as the reflective surface for data that we're getting about whales from all different parts of the world, and look at it through the lens of like, what would the world be like, almost as if humankind wasn't here. And then that gives us a very, very pristine and accurate picture of whales in almost an untouched by man environment. So in addition to just working on the preservation measures of these two species, that larger data set is incredibly valuable as we look at what climate change is doing, and a whole host of other things, shipping routes and any number of things to whales all over the world. So we can continue to go forward. And maybe we could go to the next slide. Okay, so another campaign of ours, and this is extremely unfortunate, is in the Faroe Islands, north of Scotland. This is a protectorate of Denmark. This is a traditional slaughter of pilot whales and bottlenose dolphins that dates back centuries. And centuries ago, when the Faroe Islands were just a lonely, isolated cluster of islands off Scotland, this was relevant to their food supply. But the Faroe Islands is now exceptionally wealthy, very deeply plugged into the global economy. And the Faroese public health authorities actually advise against the consumption of this whale meat due to the PCBs and the contaminants, et cetera. So with the local public health authorities advising, and in the case of children and pregnant women, actually prohibiting the consumption of this whale meat, it's clear to us that this is nothing other than a cruel tradition. And to be very blunt for a quick second, and this is an educated audience, so I owe you a little bit of a description here. They detect pods of pilot whales and bottlenose dolphins. They use jet skis and motorboats to drive them into a cove. And then there's people from the fishing village waiting there with those ropes you can see are attached to hooks, and they hook through the blowholes. They drag these pilot whales and the bottlenose dolphins into shallow water, and they kill them with traditional kind of spears. And what we've done, in addition to documenting this and mounting some diplomatic pressures, is we've actually tracked the processing of these carcasses all the way to when the carcasses are dumped somewhere else in the Faroe Islands. So we can document this from cradle to grave and prove and shine a bright light on the idea that this has absolutely nothing to do with human consumption, and that this is essentially just a cruel tradition. Some of you may have seen the Cove, which is based on Taiji in Japan, but it's that same issue, tradition. And this is a joint campaign between Sea Shepherd Conservation Society and Sea Shepherd Global. The fishing season is just now coming to an end in the Faroes. There were about 6 grins this year, one very recently. The grind is the traditional Faroese term for these hunts. And we are looking at a number of pressure points as it relates to fair trade agreements and truth in labeling. When you see Faroese Island salmon and things like that, we're going to be mounting a consumer awareness campaign to get people to spend their money elsewhere. And on the encouraging front, before we leave this slide, we are seeing that this is aging out. Even compared to 5 years ago, there's less and less young people that are participating. And so we take some level of comfort in that. But if you go to our website and if you look at some of the footage that I personally sometimes can't watch it. And then the saddest thing is that since these are very social animals and they're cetaceans, the members of the pod that are not slaughtered stay in that cove, expecting that their pod members are somehow going to be coming back at some point. And that's one of the saddest things. They completely lose their bearings and often die in the water right off that cove that you can see, because in the way that the social structure of their pods work, it's their job to wait for the members of the pod who have left, and they'll stay there until they either beach themselves or starve or any number of things. So it's not just the whales and dolphins that are killed by these people that you can see right here. But we can move on, but this is something that we take very seriously. I was in Brussels in the EU Parliament towards the end of last year, meeting with members of the EU around how we can ratchet up the economic pressure. If we could go the other direction, please. So this now brings us down to the Southern Ocean and Antarctica. This is another joint campaign with Sea Shepherd Conservation Society and Sea Shepherd Global. What we're seeing down there, and this also ultimately touches on whales, is earlier when I mentioned illegal, unreported, and unregulated fishing, unregulated really relates to what we think of when we use the term high seas. And a lot of the Antarctic Ocean are the high seas, which is to say that they're not the sovereign water of any one country. There's a lot of countries that have equities down there. What we're working to do down there is curb the massive devastation to the krill population that is ultimately, in one form or another, affecting virtually every whale in the world, because so goes our Antarctic krill and so go the whales of the world. and the massive devastation of the krill supply down there and the lawlessness with which the trawlers conduct themselves. These Norway is involved, Japan is involved, Russia is involved, China is involved, and what we're going to be doing now, and I'm learning a lot about these things as these things go along, is in 2023, Chemelar, which is the global governing body of this area and the catch limits and things like that, was being lobbied to increase the catch limits, to actually take the krill oil catch and increase it. We managed to actually fight that diplomatically and flatline that. And as many of you know, in some of these conservation equations, the absence of a loss is your victory, right? So we didn't lose, and we prevented an increase in the catch limits. So that was our victory. Now we're going to be going to actually push on the diplomatic front to have huge swaths of the Antarctic Ocean declared marine protected areas. And very fortunately, guess who is in the business of protecting marine protected areas? And that's Sea Shepherd. So not only are we pushing to have the marine protected areas established, but we will then move forward and develop the protocols and provide the ships and the captains and the crews to provide the protection itself. I think there's one or two more. If not, I can just talk about a couple other things before we, we have a couple campaigns. There's two campaigns that are in their infancy. The Gulf of Ulloa on the Pacific coast of Mexico is a place where turtles that are born in Japan, it's actually the longest migratory pattern of any marine species at all, we believe. These guys you can see here are what we would call loggerhead turtles. Swim the entirety of the Pacific Ocean to come to these very fertile waters on the coast of Mexico and fatten up for a couple of years, and then turn around and go back. And this is another situation where illegal fishing gear is resulting in a disproportionate and very troubling spike in deaths of these particular turtles. We're at the very infancy. As you can see here, we just signed the MOU in January of this year to begin some feasibility surveys about what the actual area is involved, what are some of the jurisdictional issues, what kinds of ships would work best here. I actually have a couple colleagues on a ship down there, just finishing up right now, doing some of our most initial kind of feasibility survey of the area. And we can go to the next slide, which I think is, every time I think we're wrapping up, there's more. So if we could go to the next slide, that would be helpful. Yeah, and ultimately, let me just say one more thing. Don't go back slide-wise. You can stay right where you were if you'd be kind enough. But on the Gulf of Ulloa, we're also starting a brand new campaign in the Gulf of Mexico to protect one of the largest coral reefs in the Western Hemisphere. If you'd be kind enough to go back a slide, that would be helpful. Otherwise, I can wrap up here as well. In fact, you can just take the slides off at this point, if you don't mind. And maybe Maria, you could just send this deck around to people so that they could check out some of those videos as well. And maybe you could put me back so I could see our guests, and I'll wrap up my comments. But there's one or two last things that I'm really excited about that I want to share with everyone. So if you could remove the share screen option so I could see everyone again, that would be great. Thank you so much for the help with the slides. Last is we just got our flagship for the Upper Gulf out of dry dock. And what's really exciting about that, as it heads back to begin our 11th year in the Upper Gulf of California, is we replaced our 1-ton crane on that with a 3-ton crane, tripling our net pulling capacity. This last year, we encountered some ghost nets that were actually longer or bigger or more waterlogged than we could actually pull out of the ocean. It was a $150,000 install between the crane and the installation thereof. The crane before that was actually, some of you who may have known us for a little while, The crane before we had actually taken from the Jean Paul de Joria, which was one of our ships from 4 or 5 years ago. So we're constantly kind of, living off the land, but we're excited that we can go into our 11th year in the Upper Gulf and with tripling our net pulling capacity so that we can pull more of these deadly nets out of the ocean. And this is, I guess, where I want to end, which is most of our campaigns are focused on protecting one species. But the most encouraging thing that we're finding in all this is that as soon as you define an area in Antarctica, in the Upper Gulf, in Gulf of Mexico, wherever it may be, and then you institute a protocol to protect it, and you prevent illegal fishing, and you pull out some of the debris as much as you can, not only is the specific species that we're there to protect protected and given a better chance of survival, but we see a rejuvenation across virtually every species there. We see more calves earlier in the year, bigger calves. We see, the fertility rates, all kinds of things just blossom. And I think it's a great example of why those of us who care about the ocean, and I know that applies to every single desert dolphin in the room, can, I think, take great encouragement from some of the things that we can do, Sea Shepherd, and some of the other NGOs that are out there doing important work. And last, like I said, 315,000 people have supported us in this work. We get no money from governments. Maybe we could even have a conversation someday about some desert dolphins coming down and being on one of our ships, which I think would be really cool.
Yes.
It sounds like Maria agrees with maybe the value of that idea. But let me do this. I'll stop here. Thank you so much for having me. To all of you, I hope you have a wonderful trip. And Maria, thank you so much for reaching out like 6 months ago or whatever it was to get me to visit. And then I know you have a lot to get to and you have a trip. But if there's 1 or 2 questions that maybe could be fed to Maria so she could read, I can only hear whoever's on the microphone. But then if you don't have time for that in your program and you need to move on, yes, I've seen the movie Seaspiracy, absolutely. And yes, we did. In fact, we're the only NGO still in the Upper Gulf after things got violent in 2017, 2018. We've been shot at. We've had Molotov cocktails thrown at us. We didn't leave. That's one of the things about Sea Shepherd is we are absolutely relentless. And so we're still there. We saw it through. But so to that specific question, let me see if there's anything else here in the chat. Yes, I'm aware of that in terms of phytoplankton. So someone says, do you find that most people are aware that we get 80 to 85% of the O2 we breathe is from ocean plants, primarily phytoplankton, which I think we can all be honest in just calling whale poop, if that's fair. I think many of you know more than me, but I think that's whale poop. Not enough people know it, I think is what would be my answer to that. So yes, I bump into a lot of people that do know this, but that's not to say that our work in building awareness is ever going to be done, because without the blue there is no green, right? Without healthy oceans, then very little else matters. So thank you for the question in the chat.
Can I be heard? Okay. Is there anyone who would like to ask a question to Roger? Yes, Charlie. So I'm going to give the mic to Charlie.
So could Charlie Nichols, could you give us any encouraging words then for the Upper Gulf and the vaquita? What do you estimate their population is now?
We believe, and thank you, Charlie, for the question. We believe we are right down to the knife edge. We believe that there's somewhere between 8 to 12 vaquita left. But, some encouraging things are that a lot of these protocols work. We're up against decades of momentum in the wrong direction. But Dr. Taylor, who's really an amazing person, if if anyone wants to, I suggest you take a little bit of time to Google her. She recognizes there's one vaquita that has a little nick out of their dorsal fin, and she's seen that vaquita since 2018. And so she's very encouraged that she's seeing that kind of longevity. And then we saw yearlings this year, which means that the calves of last year, at least some of them survived. And then, Dr. Taylor herself says that were it not for the campaign that I discussed in part of my presentation, that she's quite confident that the vaquita would be essentially extinct now and just gone forever. And I think, I don't want to presume that I can speak for all of you, but I think it's fair to assume that all of us reject the idea that that a species is going to go extinct on our watch, and that's unacceptable in this day and age with the tools at our disposal. I refuse to accept that. But based on the last few years, we're very encouraged, and it's a difficult fight. And I'm sure all of you know that, sometimes the most valuable and rewarding things in life are difficult. And so we don't go into this with, kind of a rosy vision that this is going to be like flicking a light switch and solving it, because ultimately there's got to be a change of hearts and minds. But there's a new government that coming into Mexico in October. The president-elect coming in October has a degree in environmental science, and so we feel very good. We feel very good that President-elect Sheinbaum is going to take what we've built in terms of kind of reversing the trend with the vaquita and other species, and really help us get further and further up that food chain of prevention, which is what really is the name of the game when you roll up your sleeves and get into this conservation stuff.
Is there anyone else who'd like to ask a question to Roger? Okay, Roger, thank you so much for your wonderful presentation. And
thanks, Desert Dolphins. Have a wonderful trip. Keep doing what you're doing, and I hope to meet some of you in person down the road.
Yes, and I shall encourage all of our members, to where to donate.
Yeah, it's Sea Shepherd, it's seashepherd.org, and we have a monthly giving program. You can just sign up for like $15 a month. I myself personally do $50 a month. But that's the kind of support that allows us to really map out very strategic, high impact campaigns. We have a 100% rating from Charity Navigator, so we're very, very judicious about every dollar that's donated to us. But thank you so much. Have a wonderful time in San Carlos, and I look forward to saying hello to all of you sometime down the road.
Thank you so much, Roger. Thank you.
Wow.
I don't think you hear the applause, but thank you. Have a good night.
Thank you, Maria, for coordinating that. Took a lot to do that. Let's move on to Cherie. Before you go, Maria, why don't you draw the first ticket? The Ironwood stuff.
Okay, honey. Ready for dinner? Come on, let's make some dinner.